Okay. So we were talking about language development. As language teachers, we all are trying to develop language in our children. Especially when we are teaching English, we are focusing on the second language acquisition. So we need to think in detail about English language teaching. We need to think about why English. That is a broader area, and we have to consider that area in detail, and we will deal with that area later on. Here we are thinking about dealing with language teaching and second language teaching. Is there a difference between second language teaching and first language teaching? Whether language taught, whether it is language mother tongue or second language, what are the differences, and is there any particular time for beginning the teaching of second language? These things are to be addressed. In my time, when I was a student, I started learning the second language English only in the 5th standard. But we know that we teach English in the primary classes itself. Why so? Why did we start teaching teaching English in the primary classes? I mean, in the first standard. Linguists have found out that language learning supplements each other. If you are learning one language, learning another language with it will not go in opposite direction, but they supplement each other. They help each other. So there is no hindrance by one language in learning another language. That is why we started teaching English from the first standard itself. Now we have textbook for first standard students. So teaching a second language, we have developed so many methods, so many ideologies are there to substantiate in introducing one or another method. Let us have an overview of some of these methods. Actually, in the formal classrooms, we started teaching English in a particular method years back. It is called alphabetic method. So we started teaching them alphabets first. By learning alphabets, students, we think that the educationalists of this method, alphabetic method, thinks that by using this alphabetic method, students will learn language easily. So they considered that the one and only way to, or the first way to learn a language is learning its alphabet. That's why they started teaching the English alphabet first. But we now feel that that is not the correct way. We are not using that method right now. After alphabetic method, there came grammar translation method. It was widely used in the year up to 1840 to 1940. For a century, For 100 years, this method was widely used, grammar translation method. So what is grammar translation method? This method says that we can learn a language by translating the main idea or the grammatical items of the target language. We translate the language, at the same time we teach the grammar also. But grammar translation method was criticized very vigorously. It was criticized intensively when it was introduced itself, when it was introduced in the 19th century, because it was considered that this method cannot fulfill the demands of language learning. So that is why we are no more using this method, grammar translation method. Then came another method, that is direct method. Actually, this method came into existence as the outcome of the reaction against the so-called grammar translation method. It was based on the assumption that the learners of foreign and second language should directly think in English. This method is against the translation of written and oral text, and they focus on telling the meanings of words through action, demonstration, or real objects. So that is the main idea behind this method, direct method. This method does not approve translating from language 1 to language 2, L1 to L2. But instead of translating, we teach with through actions or demonstrating something, through oral or actions, and then showing them some objects. And this method focuses on directly thinking, doing, and discussion and conversation. And these all things should be done in the target language, that is L2. We are using this method more or less now. We cannot fully negate this method. Though we are using newer methods in the recent years, we make use of some elements of direct method too. Direct method demands the learners to do oral communication in the target language, that means in the second language, and it also demands pronunciation and accent to be just like the native speaker. That is why the authorities of this direct method developed received pronunciation or RP. For that, they developed phonetic scripts also. So, direct method demands the learners to do oral communication in the second language, and it also demands the pronunciation and accent to be just like the native speakers. So, there is a need for the language school. So, in these language classes, English is taught as such without translating. So these are some of the broader aspects of the some methods that we used in the first era of English language teaching, English as a second language teaching. Then came the structural approach. I am not going in detail to all of these approaches and methods, because you will be intensively learning these things in your textbook in the TTC course, maybe in the coming semesters. So let us look into the structural approach. The structural approach mainly employs the techniques of the direct method, but the reading and writing skills are not wholly neglected. The one drawback of direct method was there was no ample opportunity for reading and writing. So here structural approach focuses on these items too. So here the structural approach says that arrangement of words in such a way as to form suitable patterns, and that patterns may make the meaning of the language clear to us. Any language has its own structure and skeleton which gives this language an appearance, a good appearance. So identifying this skeleton, that the structure and vocabulary of a particular language, we try to impart those items to the learners. We try to inculcate the language in the learners. That is the way of the structural approach. But in the later periods, structural approach was also criticized because it was only suitable for lower grades. Continuous teaching of structures and the repetition make the atmosphere dull and boring. It is also neglected. So in due course, the due importance was not given to structural approach, and we have oral approach or situational language teaching. The oral approach is a method in which children to use whatever hearing they get from their surroundings. So this situational language teaching focuses on the situations, whatever language they get from the situations, and they also take help from the context to understand and use the language. So context is very important. The situation is very important for teaching a language item. That is the core element of situational language teaching. Another important development in the field of language teaching is TPR, that is total physical response. TPR is based on the premise that the human brain has a biological program for acquiring any natural language on earth, including the sign language of the deaf. That is very important aspect of total physical response. A human brain has a biological program. It was programmed in our brain for acquiring any natural language. So that is the main aspect of total physical response is developed. We can see this process if we observe the language learning process of an infant. If you observe the language process of an language development process of an infant, a small child, we can see that there is an innate capacity for the human brain to develop, to acquire language. The communication between parents and the child consists of both verbal and physical aspect. So there is a physical aspect should attribute to the learning of a language along with the verbal attributes. So total physical response focuses on the physical and oral attributes of language. Our students respond to the commands of the teacher, which requires a physical movement. So in a classroom, a teacher gives instructions and the students respond to it. So these sort of things are happening in a total physical response. Another important finding in the field of methods of teaching is silent way. It is teaching is proposed. This method is based on the view that the teacher should be silent in the classroom as much as possible, but the teacher must encourage the students to speak and use the language. That is the silent way of teaching. Keeping silent. Keeping silent means not keeping mum all together all the time in the class, but teacher speaks only a less, but gives the students the chance to speak. That is the backbone of this method. The learners are facilitated in learning by giving them some problem to solve, which involves the materials that are needed to be learned. So in a silent way, students work a lot, and the teacher's role is somewhat the role of only a mentor or a guide. And after that, here comes an important methodology in the field of teaching English, that is communicative language teaching. CLT, communicative language teaching. What is communicative language teaching? It was developed in the era of evolution by the British people in the Britain. Before communicative language teaching, situational language teaching was in practice. Communicative language teaching was actually developed in the opposition of audiolingual method, which focuses on drilling and memorization. So communicative language teaching is not in favor of memorization. It is not in favor of drilling. It favors in communication. It favors communication, one-to-one communication, or teacher to students communication that should be happen in a real situation. So the communicative language teaching method focuses on a real life situation, and there should be a communication between the teacher and the students, teacher and student to student, teacher to student. It focuses on meaning rather than accuracy. So in communication, we may tend to make so many mistakes. The communicative language teaching approach does not consider the corrections of mistakes or accuracy. It does not focus on accuracy. It focuses on meaning. Another important development in the field of teaching methodology is task-based teaching, task-based language teaching. So in this methodology, they propose that the methodology proposes that students are given a task, and they are asked to develop the ideas to solve the task, to solving, or in a way it is a problem solving method. Actually, the communicative language teaching is a teaching method for teaching a second language, and it gives the importance of students' interactive ability to express their own ideas in the target language. Communication ability is the essential goal in language learning. That is what the communicative language teaching says. The communicative approach claims that learning a foreign language should not be focused on language structures or grammar or vocabulary, but also on the communicative functions that the language performs. And in the language, learners should also learn the relations between the structures and the communicative functions in real situations in the real time. There are so many advantages for this communicative language teaching. The goal of communicative language teaching is the development and improvement of knowledge and skills that will help a speaker to make his or her communication successful. So communication is the focus of this methodology. The main focus of this methodology is effectiveness. When we consider how native speakers of English think about the use of language, then it becomes obvious that our main goal is effective communication. So, for effective communication, communicative language teaching methodology is in a way useful. So, we move on to the next part, that in our day-to-day situation, in our day-to-day classrooms, what are the items that we teach, or what are the methodologies that we teach to our students. And we have here just a presentation for you. Just look at it. Okay, can you see this? There are some learning theories in the first column, and there are some elements of that theories are given. The first one is behaviorist paradigm. The first one is the behaviorist methodology, and it focuses on repetition and drill. Behaviorist thinkers say that language develops through repetition and drill. So we can improve our language, develop our language through repetition. After repeating many times words, repeat the words many times, repeat the spelling of words many times, or repeat the sentences many times, memorize the poems. These are the main factors that the behaviorist patterns put forward. Another one is cognitive ideology or cognitive method. This methodology says for learning a language, what is essential? Practice is essential. Learning grammar is essential. Close exercise is essential. Close exercise means exercises of vocabulary and grammar. So through these repetition and practice of the learning grammar and learning of vocabulary, language learning is possible, says the cognitive approach. Another one is constructivist approach. In constructivist approach, constructionist approach and constructivist approaches are there. There is a slight difference between them. Acquisition of comprehensible input. That is an important area, comprehensible input. Whatever input we give to our children, it should be comprehensible. They should understand what the input is, what is to be given to me. So comprehensible input should be optimal. You cannot give a maximum or amount of comprehensible input to the child for learning. It should be optimum, not minimum, not maximum. It should be minimum essential. That is called optimum, and that should be understandable or comprehensible to the child. That is the constructionist approach. And constructivist approach says child constructs knowledge. Child constructs knowledge based upon current and past and through the negotiation of meaning through dialogues. Negotiation of meaning is an important aspect of constructivist approach. Negotiation of meaning of words. You are not supplying the meaning of words directly. We negotiate the meaning from the context. Suppose you are reading an English newspaper. You may hit upon some unfamiliar word while reading the news. You are not going to look for the meaning of the word in a dictionary every now and then. But what we do is we negotiate the meaning of that unfamiliar word from the given context. What might be the meaning of that particular word in this context? We will be thinking about that and we negotiate a meaning. That way is very, very particular in a constructivist approach of learning. Another one is socio-cultural approach. Here, language play a social interaction. Social interaction is essential in the socio-cultural atmosphere of learning a language. So language learns from we learn language from social interaction, from society. I think some aspects of this were elaborated in our yesterday's class by Dr. Bhaskar Nair. And last but not the least, discovery and experimental approach. It focuses on reflection on your experience by living in environment. So when we interact with something, when we interact, whether it is an object, when we interact with a textbook, or when we interact with a novel or story, reflection on your experience is very essential for understanding it or developing that language. So language develops through reflections on our own experiences in our living environment. These methodologies are based on language acquisition paradigm. There is a language learning paradigms and language acquisition paradigms. Earlier we mentioned about the communicative language teaching, direct method, silent way. All these things are language learning paradigms. But now the era of teaching of English has come into, we talk about language acquisition paradigms. So the things mentioned in these columns are behaviorist, cognitive, constructionist, constructivist, sociocultural, and discovery and experimental paradigm methodologies are included in the acquisition paradigms. So acquisition paradigms, whether it is constructivist or sociocultural, they take and give and take from one another. No matter all the methodologies that we developed in this due course from the beginning of teaching of second language up to the present era, we can say that all these are important and all these are developed from one another, from depending on the other one. You cannot say that the alphabetic method was a wrong thing when we compare to that of the things happening in that time when it was evolved, because it is the stepping stone, the first step of teaching this language. Then we developed another one based on that, and the third one based on the second, and the fourth one based on or from the improvement of the third one, and the fifth one based on the fourth one or the improvement of the fourth one. So likewise, we developed so many methodologies. We may tend to use some elements of each methodology in our day-to-day classroom. So we have to look into the acquisition paradigm in detail, but I don't think that this is not the best time for that. We can almost conclude this session. Before concluding, I am ready here for your questions. So you can come up with your questions if you have any. I do think that we can use our time for the next few minutes for clearing your doubts if you have any questions. So please come up with your questions.